The year is 2005. In the middle of the Caribbean Sea lies a small private island where no tourists went and no media cameras could reach. From the outside, the place looked like a luxury paradise. Blue water, white sand, high security boundaries. But behind closed doors on that island, one of the darkest crimes of modern history was unfolding. Young girls, trafficking, sexual exploitation. This was not a movie scene. This was the truth that later became part of U.S. investigation records and court documents. Some girls were lured with money, some with job offers, some under the pretense of help. But once they arrived on this secret island, their world changed completely. The place had every facility imaginable: a helipad, guest houses, a private dock, security systems that functioned like round-the-clock surveillance. But the one thing missing most was law, consent, and justice. And at the center of this entire network was one name: Jeffrey Epstein.
A man who, in public image, was described as a billionaire financier and an insider in elite social circles, but whose real identity remained in the shadows for years. The real question was this: how did all of this continue so openly for so many years? And why did no one stop it? When a few teenage girls in Palm Beach, Florida, first filed complaints with the police, no one imagined the case would remain a local crime story. Slowly, the case transformed into a global scandal. A scandal where money, power, politics, and systemic failure were all about to collide at once. Then came 2019. Jeffrey Epstein was arrested again at the federal level, facing serious charges of sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy. But by then, it was far too late, because the voices of the girls who had been ignored for years had now become a question the entire world was asking. And this is where the story begins, from a secret island to a jail cell, and to a man whose death did not bury the truth, but made it even more mysterious and more dangerous. In today's special episode, we will understand who Jeffrey Epstein really was, and how an ordinary-seeming man became the master of a dark empire built on money, influence, and crime. The year is 1953, Brooklyn, New York. This is where Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born. No royal family, no business empire, no extraordinary beginning. His father was an ordinary government employee. His mother worked as a school assistant. From the outside, this looked like a completely middle-class American family, the kind that usually produces either an ordinary job or a quiet life. Epstein's education was nothing remarkable either. He enrolled in college but never completed a degree. No formal training in finance. No elite MBA. And yet this same man would later be seen sitting among some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world. This was the first mystery that investigators would later question. In the early 1970s, Epstein got a job teaching math and physics at a prestigious private school in New York. This was the same school where the children of wealthy families studied, the children of politicians, bankers, and CEOs. It was here that Epstein first got a close look at the elite world. Here, he learned how money thinks and how power behaves. But Epstein did not remain a teacher for long. Suddenly, and without any clear public explanation, he left education and entered the world of high finance. In 1976, he got a job at a top investment bank. And from that point onward, his life changed direction completely. The question remains the same even today. Without a degree, without a proven track record, how was such a major entry even possible? By the 1980s, Epstein had begun presenting himself as a financial advisor and money manager. But his work did not look like the work of a typical advisor. His clients were not public. His companies were opaque. And his transactions mostly moved through private trusts and shell-like structures, making them extremely difficult to trace. Slowly, Epstein stopped being just a man who managed money. He became something else, an access provider, a person who introduced rich people to other rich people, who gave powerful people private spaces, who made himself useful everywhere. And that usefulness would later become both his greatest strength and his greatest danger. In public image, he was a quiet billionaire. Few interviews, few statements, almost zero transparency. But behind the curtain, his life was filling with luxury properties, private jets, and secret locations that the outside world would only glimpse much later. And from here, this story stops being just the story of one man's success. It begins turning into a question that remains unanswered even today. Was Jeffrey Epstein really a self-made financial genius? Or was he part of a much larger game? Now the question becomes even more serious. How exactly did Jeffrey Epstein become so rich? Because where the wealth of ordinary financiers is usually visible through companies, stock holdings, and identifiable clients, Epstein's money story was opaque and confusing from the very beginning. In public records, there is no clear sign of large-scale investments under his name. No obvious revolutionary business model that explains how he accumulated hundreds of millions of dollars. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Epstein positioned himself on Wall Street as a high-level financial advisor. He claimed that he worked only for ultra-wealthy clients whose names never appeared in public. That alone was the first red flag, because in the finance industry, transparency is a basic norm. But Epstein's entire model rested on secrecy. Gradually, he built an image that he did more than manage money. He presented himself as an expert in tax planning, asset protection, and confidential wealth structuring. His companies operated mostly through private trusts and limited partnerships, making it extremely difficult to trace real ownership and cash flow. According to investigators, this same structure later became his shield. A major part of Epstein's wealth is believed to have been tied to Leslie Wexner, one of the leading American billionaires of that time. Wexner gave Epstein extraordinary access to his finances. He even granted him power of attorney. This was the point where Epstein's life appeared to change overnight. A multi-million-dollar mansion in New York, private jets, global travel, all of it began in this era. But this is also where the questions deepen. Finance experts and journalists repeatedly pointed out that there was no major hedge fund under Epstein's name, no famous IPO, no public financial success story that could explain his enormous wealth. And yet his lifestyle kept expanding. That means the money was coming in, but its source was not public. Because of this secrecy, many people later proposed another theory, that Epstein was not simply an investor. He may have been functioning more like an information broker, a man who used access, introductions, and influence as a kind of currency. The proof has never been fully public. But one thing is clear. His wealth cannot be explained by traditional finance alone. By the year 2000, Epstein had become a man who operated like a behind-the-scenes power player. He stayed away from the spotlight. He gave no meaningful interviews, and he said almost nothing about what he actually did. But the luxury visible in his life said one thing clearly. This wealth was not ordinary. And from this point on, Epstein's story stops being only about money. It becomes a story about power, secrecy, and control. And the next chapter takes us into his business networks, shell companies, and hidden operations. So far, we have seen the money arrive and the power expand. But one basic question remains unanswered. What exactly did Jeffrey Epstein do? Because normally, any billionaire is identified by their business. A factory, a brand, a hedge fund. But in Epstein's case, that identity was blurred from the very beginning. His claim was that he worked only for ultra-high net worth individuals, people who wanted privacy and wanted to stay far away from any scrutiny. That is why most of his work remained off the record. Epstein's companies were unusual too. There was no giant corporate structure, no thousands of employees. Instead, there were small private entities, trusts, and limited partnerships. These structures were designed so that tracing where the money came from and where it went would not be easy. According to investigative journalists, that design was Epstein's greatest strength. His primary office operated out of an extremely expensive mansion in New York. That alone was a red flag. Normally, finance firms operate out of glass towers and corporate offices. But Epstein's entire setup was spread across personal properties and private spaces. Meetings did not happen in boardrooms. They happened in private homes, jets, and islands. Jeffrey Epstein did not simply manage money. He managed connections. He introduced people to people, politicians to billionaires, scientists to donors, business leaders to global access. Gradually, he became a gatekeeper, a man without whom certain high-level introductions were no longer thought possible. And that role is what made him dangerous. Because when one person begins controlling information, access, and privacy all at once, he stops being just an advisor. He becomes a power broker. In Epstein's case, many people later raised the same question. Was he really running finance? Or was finance just the cover for something else he was managing? By the year 2000, Epstein's business model had become completely non-transparent. No annual reports, no clear disclosures, no public list of clients. And yet his lifestyle kept expanding, which suggested that the system was working quietly. And this is where Epstein's story takes another turn.